Welcome back. And for those first-time joiners, take a seat at the Black Table. I'm Greg Carr, your host here on the Black Star Network, and we are joined today by two of the most important thinkers that we have on the contemporary landscape, and we'll be discussing the past, present, and future of Black History Month. A lot of conversation to be had about this month, which is widely misunderstood and misinterpreted. So we thought we would bring in two folks into the conversation who are master teachers, long-standing workers in the tradition of Black History Month and beyond, and have a conversation about it so that everybody can leave this space thinking, okay, now I understand it a little bit better. So we're going to be joined today by Dr. Ida Jones, who is currently the vice president for membership of the Association for the Study of Afro-American Life and History. Those are the originators of Black History Month. You've heard the name Carter G. Woodson. You'll hear it more today. She's a life member of that association. She's an award-winning author of a number of books. She's written books on figures like Kelly Miller. These are people you should know. Mary McLeod Bethune, who you probably heard of. William Henry Jernigan, Victoria Q. Adams. And she's currently the archivist at the Morgan State University. We'll talk more about her background. Larry Crow is also joining us. Larry Crow is a historian, a scholar, and in his role as producer and interviewer with the History Makers. Some of you have heard that platform before. He's interviewed over 1,000 notable African Americans in extended detail and makes him one of our most important resources for contemporary African American individual and institutional history. So we're very happy to be joined today by Ida and Larry. Welcome to the Black Table. Let's talk Black History Month with our friends. Hello, y'all.
Hey. Good day.
Good to see you. Good to see you. And so we want to jump right in. Ida, since you are not only one of our finest historians and teachers, you're also a record keeper, a culture keeper, and you have served prominently in ASALH, the Association of Black Women Historians, and other places. Give us a sense of the history of Black History Month. I mean, who is Woodson and where did he come from? What was he trying to do in 1926?
Yes, Carter G. Woodson was an African-American who was born in West Virginia in 1875 to enslaved parentage. He was unable to attend high school till he was in his late teens and early 20s, not because of ability, but because of access. He had the pleasure of being able to engage his aunts, uncles, his parents about the enslavement of African people, and that impelled him to pursue an education, to also steward that memory and legacy of enslaved persons. And then he sought education to be the principal tool that he would use to dismantle the rising nature of Jim Crow and xenophobia, as well as just ugliness that African Americans had endured. He dedicates his life in finishing his PhD in 1912 at Harvard University, the only African American of enslaved parentage to do so, to actually really study the scientific, but also the beneficial nature of history. In 1915, during the birth of a nation that was screened, that was endorsed by the White House by the only president with a PhD in history, calling it History Written in Light, he refutes that and creates in Chicago the Association for the Study of Negro Life and History, which was a composite of medical trained persons, business persons, community persons to seek to use education within and throughout our culture as macro African people out to the mainstream people, to use that to kind of level the playing field. So over the course of the last 106 years, the association has continued to keep the torch of Woodson lit, to use education to dismantle the xenophobia and the ugliness that African people have been able to endure imposed upon them.
Wow. So it started as a week in 26, right? And then it moves to a month?
Yes, it starts in 1926. He builds a lot of products. He builds the Journal of Negro History in 1916. He's going to build out this idea of Negro History Week, which he selected to commemorate the birthdays of Abraham Lincoln and Frederick Douglass. So it wasn't that he chose the shortest month with the least amount of days, that kind of urban legend needs to be put to rest. I've tried to use garlic and a cross to kill that, but apparently it continues to flourish. No, that's not what it was. It was to commemorate both Abraham Lincoln and Frederick Douglass. And so that week does grow out of Omega Psi Phi, where he initiates that and incubates that into schools and churches throughout the course of the 20th century. By the 1970s now, and I'm sure Larry can give greater detail about that, it becomes a month in 1976 during the bicentennial year. And so that becomes a way in which the country is going to acknowledge African American history. What Woodson did believe was that it would eventually outlive its usefulness. He really was trying to be optimistic, that we would eventually be woven into the fabric of the culture. Unlike my man, Bishop Henry McNeil Turner, who became an Afro-pessimist, realizing that there's such a toxicity with whiteness that they will never integrate and never accept African people. And of course, John Henrik Clarke as well. So we now stand apart, but yet in concert with other things that have blossomed out of the African American Heritage Month series. We have Asian Pacific Islander Month, LGBT Month, all once again borrowing from Woodson's idea to celebrate the community in concert with, quote, the mainstream.
That is remarkable that you gave us that whole panoramic scope. And I don't even want to interject. Larry, could you jump right in? I mean, I'd already set you up, man. She said you might know something about that. I mean, you're not old enough to remember Carter G. Woodson. Certainly none of us are. And both of y'all too young to remember any of this. But Larry, talk to us about it, man. How did you jump? How did you get involved with Asala and with this work?
Well, of course, Carter G. Woodson died the year before I was born. I was born in 1949. Well, the year after I was born, 1950, yeah. But I was at Wright State University, and one of the teachers, one of the history professors from Central State, taught part-time at Wright State because the black students demanded it. It was, so it was Dr. Paul McStallworth, who was a member of Asala. And at that time they had, it was Paul McStallworth, Wilhelmina S. Robinson, the brother that wrote the, Reuben S. Weston, who wrote the book about American imperialism during the 1890s. He was there, and they had a nice contingent that they would take to Asala every year. So I kind of went along with them, from Wright State. Wright State paid for it. In fact, they actually put me on a flight from Dayton to Cincinnati in 1972, and Cincinnati's like 45 miles away. So I got on. That was one of my first plane rides, to the Asala conference at the hotel in Cincinnati. Now, and I was just amazed at the scope of research, the papers that are being presented, the detail. It was my first exposure to Asala or any really black conference about anything. And I was amazed. In those days, it was J. Rupert Picott, Andrew F. Brimmer was on the board, Raymond Pace Alexander, those kind of people. Benjamin Quarles was still alive. I met A. Philip Randolph. He was at a table. He stood up. He looked like he was 7 feet tall. He said, "How are you doing, young man?" I quaked.
So Larry, were you? I mean, I'm thinking about it. Ada, we probably thinking the same thing. So many of these figures that we got a chance to read about, we study, we hear about. You actually rub shoulders with them. So were there any controversies as they moved from a week to a month? I mean, I know there was a Negro thing going on with like Rayford Logan and them cats, man. They didn't like that black word. I mean, was there any?
Well, the year I started going, they did the name change, and I missed the fireworks. Basically,
There were fireworks.
Were the year before, I guess, and they decided to do it in Cincinnati in '72 to officially do it. So the board meeting, I wasn't at the board meeting. I think it was announced at the banquet. At the banquet I was at, that they had changed the name to the Association for African American Life and History. This is 1972. Then it was in '76. I was in Chicago. I was a member of the Institute of Positive Education at the time, a new member in the fall of '76, where they established Black History Month instead of Negro History Week. And at the time I was there, I was with Dr. Anderson Thompson and Harold Pace, who are members of the Association of African Historians, which they set up as a rival to the Chicago, I guess, Asala group, that they didn't have a lot of affinity for. And
Actually,
yeah.
No, I was going to say that's a good place for us to pause. Let's take a break, and when we come back, I'm going to ask you to finish that thought, Larry, and then I'd have brought something up before we went on air about this whole moment of the late '60s, early '70s, and how these other associations and formations kind of split with, emerge from Asala, and in conversation around that very issue. So back in a moment with the Black Table on the Black Star Network.
all impacted by the culture, whether we know it or not. From politics to music and entertainment, it's a huge part of our lives, and we're going to talk about it every day right here on The Culture with me, Faraji Muhammad, only on the Black Star Network.
Welcome back to the Black Table. We are, when we left, Larry Crow and Ada Jones were leading us through a bit of the history of where the origins of Black History Month. And we are right at a moment now where we see a name change with the Association for the Study of Negro Life and History to Afro-American Life and History. And it's a very formative moment in the history of Black folk in the United States. So let's bring our folk back, our guests, Ada Jones and Larry Crow. Larry, you were saying you were there, and then Ada, if you don't mind coming in and maybe helping us think about what was going on in that moment in terms of some of this intellectual fracturing and movement. Go ahead, Larry. You were saying.
Yeah, I was saying that Anderson Thompson and Dr. Pates and others had established what they call Black Liberation Month, to be in place of African American History Month. That I saw, I saw value in African American History Month and Black History Month doing a month myself, but also, I understood what they were talking about. There was some tension, between some of our scholars in terms of whether we should. They thought that Sala was a little bit too conservative, in those days.
Ida, what you think about that?
I think he's hitting it on the head. At the same part, you're going to have a generation of young people, Rosalind Torborg Penn, who's going to craft the Association of Black Women Historians. She's going to garner support from Dorothy Porter Wesley, John Henry Clark, and Benjamin Quarles, because women had issue as well. Even her predecessors had issue because gender was also muted along the terms of being, quote, loyal to the race. So there's going to be generational kind of friction that's going to cause other organizations to spark. And then Dr. Leonard Jeffrey said in one of his interviews that ASCAC, and I believe Larry's wearing the sweatshirt with it, also somewhat came out of the association per se to form an organization that was concentrated on ancient and early African civilizations, not to dismiss the association, but say there's enough of an ocean of information that we can super concentrate in our particular subfields and then come together under an umbrella of the diaspora. And unfortunately, that has not happened as much as we would like it to happen, because we've had rifts in other organizations as well. But hopefully the 21st century, as we see the dilution of what is African and African American history and culture, that we need to coalesce and be allowed to stand apart from, but in concert with. And that's not because we're not letting anyone in, but we need to understand what the principal ask is of African people to understand themselves.
It's interesting as y'all talking, it reminds me that some of the names you mentioned, Wilhelmina Robinson, Rupert Peacock, and to hear you, Ida, say that there were gender issues, and clearly they were there. And I reflect back, and you for a time, if memory serves me correctly, you helped edit, and certainly the Negro History Bulletin, or the Black History, now the Black History Bulletin. When I go back and look at those issues, I'm certainly, you can see the ideological, but a lot of what you're articulating in terms of this grand vision of global Blackness is in those documents. And so there's the African Heritage Studies Association. I mean, help us understand. I mean, people would say, well, why give it a month? Why not do it all year? But it seems that they were really doing that kind of work all year. Do either of you want to talk about, the work that these folk who were involved in ASALH, and not only ASALH, but these other formations, African Heritage Studies Association, so many others, were doing all year round? Because a lot of it seems to be in those pages.
Well, when I was growing up, I would say there was, I got a glimpse of this. I found a copy of African Heroes and Heroines in the Fifth Street Carnegie Library here in Dayton, and took it home when I was about 11, I guess. But you would see trickling in as the 60s progressed, books like Russell Adams' Great Negroes, Past and Present, Afro-Am Publishers. They were doing the Black History calendars that the brother in Philadelphia did. Those kinds of things, and information was coming out, but it was not until 72 that I had any sense of the breadth and activity of ASALH,
And folks, just so folks know, who wrote African Heroes and Heroines?
Yeah, Woodson and Wesley, yeah.
Woodson and Wesley goes back.
Charles Wesley. Charles Wesley at the time was the president of Central State University, about 15 miles from here.
Wow.
And he was well known. He was a hero in this area. So,
what about what your part of the world? You come out of Massachusetts. Are there roots there in terms of folk doing local history and community history and work?
Adelaide Cromwell. And her, she was an institution in and of herself, along with other African Americans who taught there as well. But just to kind of double back on this issue of whether it's 1 month a week or how we should celebrate, people really, once again, this urban legend that it's only the month, that was never the intention. Woodson sought to use that time period for the world to kind of concentrate on who we were. He didn't limit himself to that. He lived a monastic life, similar to yourself, Dr. Carr, ensconced in a nest of books and research, because it for him was literally his life's blood. It was religion, it was missionary, it was just his entire raison d'etre. So I don't think, and those people like Wesley and Logan and Green and even Lorraine Williams and some of the other women, Merce Tate, they also dedicated themselves relatively, if not 90-10, 60-40 to the idea of the race and eliminating this kind of misunderstanding of where we are on the records. So that was what he sought to do. And it wasn't sought to best anyone, which is the Western idea of how this is. It was an African idea that we all sit at the table of humanity as brothers, not as servant and master. And so that's very important for us to understand. And I'm actually working on a campaign to say, how do you ASALH? Do you do it 3? Because we have the February, September, December folks. But then we have these branches. Woodson also sought to create these branches which live out on the granular level in their cities and states, this idea of Black education, Black modeling, Black encouragement, Black mentoring. So all of what we're doing now with all these other organizations, he had that understanding. And even in his narrative, Mrs. Calvert and Mrs. Tate, who would be in their 100s plus if they were still living, talked about how he'd pass out lollipops and ice cream and invite them in to kind of look at what he had and engage them. They became school teachers in Washington, D.C., and they lived that example of mentoring and teaching passively and both directly. So that's always what Woodson had in mind.
Could y'all talk some about, right in that vein, Ida, that you've opened for us, some of those heroes and heroines, some of those local folk? Because as you're talking, I'm thinking about, over the years, hearing both of you talk about that network, the Black church, the Black schools. I mean, looking in the Negro History Bulletin, how many children wrote articles and school teachers wrote articles. What was the importance of those Black institutions in forming this kind of army, for lack of a better term, to spread knowledge? And
I love that idea, because I think it's the Ubuntu that we're talking about now, that it takes all of us, and there's no big I's and little U's. The idea of purging the westernized mindset that it's a vertical relationship where I'm on top because I'm the lettered professional and you are the quote proletariat listening to me talk, that was not what needed to be done. Everyone needed to be brought to some level of stewardship, first of all, that we're stewarding this. None of us are the beginning or the end of this. We're simply stewarding our time for those who are going to inherit it, to honor those who've gone before. So Woodson really clearly understood the idea of stewardship, but he also understood the idea of empowerment, that your story matters. Whether it's your parents or your nieces or even just you yourself, your story matters. So the idea of not just stewardship, but also that every story matters, and it encourages and empowers someone else to kind of live their full life. That's principally what his drive was, through these branches, through the school teachers, through the sororities, the fraternities, the Masonic lodges, the churches, all of these culturally organized groups is what was going on.
So Negroes had institutions before we tried to integrate the white ones. This is shocking news.
That's Woodson's revelation. That's Eureka, right?
Let me say this too. Maybe a few things real quick. Back in the, I don't know where this starts. It's the kind of thing to say the first, you don't know what you're talking about, but we don't know. But back in the 19th century, we have Black people meeting around our history and culture when David Ruggles gathered people together, in New York, around his bookstore library and anti-slavery. But you have, like, going forward, you have like the Negro Society for Historical Research in 1911, founded by basically Arthur Schomburg and
John Bruce with that? Yeah,
John Edward Bruce, right. Yeah. In Yonkers, actually, where he lived in Yonkers, which is north of Harlem. But he establishes that in 1911, and that flourishes through the establishment of ASALH. Now here locally, I'm the branch historian for the Paul Laurence Dunbar branch of ASALH, which was founded by Margaret Peters, who was she wrote 2 curricula for the state of Ohio that were never used, Black history curricula. She was the sister of Wendell Peters, who we all know, who had the photographic memory, great mind, you have organizations, that pop up, to discuss local history, book clubs. You have a lot of them can be found in a book that Eleanor DuVernay, Sinnett, Paul Coates, and Thomas Battle wrote.
Black Bibliophiles and Collectors.
That's right.
Yes.
That's right.
I didn't mean to cut you off.
No. This is good. This is a conversation. Look, those are oddest people you just evoked. In fact, she worked in Moreland Spingarn. So Thomas Battle, long.
To mention the American Negro
they are
Academy
royalty,
as
far as I'm concerned. They're Black royalty. And
exactly.
I know them. I love them. Those are the people. So, did you know Benjamin Quarles, Ida?
I did not, and I'm right here coexisting, and I did not have the pleasure of meeting him at all. I met Roland McConnell, who
Roland McConnell.
Yes, Roland.
I interviewed Roland McConnell, and I asked him about Benjamin Quarles. I also interviewed Benjamin Quarles' wife.
Oh yes, Brett. Mm-hmm.
And they were both. What they described when they described Benjamin Quarles was a man who he did all of his research, all of his books. He did all of his research himself.
Yes,
he didn't have any graduate assistants. I mean, Dr. Thompson used to say the difference between Negro scholarship and white scholarship is that when you go to Harvard, you got you have a chauffeur limousine that takes you to the library. They meet you, they give you tea, they offer you tea. You got grad assistants, that you are supervising. He said the Negro's got to do it all himself.
Literally.
And a man like, of course, Carter G. Woodson, Benjamin Quarles, John Henry Clark. I mean, these people, are just so amazing. They did all this work themselves.
And taught a full load.
Quarles' wife, you could see the pain in her eyes talking about him. She said she couldn't get him to do anything but work. He was up all night, many nights writing. And she said at the library or something. And you could see the production, of Benjamin Quarles. I mean, it's just.
I would be remiss if I didn't, in knowing the two of you all, make the connection too about the places where they would go to do research, who kept those archives. Hallie Quinn Brown, who of course Larry led us to her literal gravesite there in Ohio, and of course a woman who you follow in her footsteps, the great Dorothy Porter, who you mentioned. You want to say a few about those Black women librarians?
Yeah, that was the vanguard. So right along with those organizations that Larry mentioned, those academies that the men formed, women had literary salons, and they actually went into professions. So I believe the vanguard, both the teachers as well as the librarians, were those stewards and understood that they needed to save those materials to make them available for young people. And I believe it's Nikki Giovanni has a book coming out, and her next book is called The Librarian. And she actually talks about how this Black librarian really helped her. James Baldwin talks about how a Black librarian helped him, how that they could save themselves and see themselves and reimagine themselves through books. So it's very important to acknowledge the vanguard of our original stewards were the librarians and the church historians as well. Sometimes, always, often the elderly women who save everything and kind of curate that material for someone else to then now steward. So it wasn't hoarding, it wasn't not letting you have access, although I understand Dorothy was rather particular about who had access. Her card catalogs, where they try to change the name from Negro to Black, she told me herself. But other than that, the idea that knowing that there's going to be a tomorrow and that these things need to be here for that tomorrow. Okay. And that's profound.
Well, we're going to take a momentary break, Larry, and then we're going to come right back on the other side of the Black table. We'll continue to talk about the importance of these iconic figures, and also how in contemporary society, our young people in particular are often taught to engage in hero worship. And some might think that history stopped after Martin Luther King. But so when we come back, we're going to get right into the conversation of where we are today with Black History Month. So back in a moment, the Black table.
Don't you think it's time to get wealthy? I'm Deborah Owens, America's Wealth Coach, and my new show on the Black Star Network focuses on the things your financial advisor or bank isn't telling you. So watch Get Wealthy on the Black Star Network.
Folks, Black Star Network is here.
Oh, no punches!
I'm real revolutionary right now.
Support this man, Black Media. He makes sure that our stories are told.
Thank you for being the voice of Black America, Roland.
Stay black. I love y'all.
All momentum we have now, we have to keep this going.
The video looks phenomenal.
See, this difference between Black Star Network and Black-owned media and something like CNN.
You can't be Black-owned media and be scared.
It's time to be smart.
Bring your eyeballs home.
You dig?
We're back, and we're continuing this conversation on the past, present, and future of Black History Month with Ida Jones and Larry Crow. Larry, you about to comment? Ida, when we left, Ida was leading us through this importance of institution building and some of the women in particular who right. kept these records and archives that these women and men, many men, more men, unfortunately, at that time, were doing the research in. But you know, say some more about that. I mean, we don't know enough about the figures you all are naming. So,
well, you know, Chicago's outstanding library ancestor is Vivian G. Harsh, and she operated at a library right off of Wabash, which was named for one of the founders of the Providence Hospital. I can't think of his name right now, but you got Vivian Harsh. You got, of course, in New York City, Dorothy Hudson took over the leadership of the Schomburg after the death of Arthur Schomburg, and the second man who I can't think of, but is very very well known figure. But she kind of brought the Schomburg into the 20th first century. I met her in Dayton. She was actually meeting with the scientists over at NCR to reduce the Schomburg clipping file to microfiche back in 1973 or 4.
Wow. You met Jean Blackwell Hisson?
Yeah, Jean
and if memory serves correct, so now help me, Larry. I think you crossed paths when you lived in Chicago with the current Librarian of Congress, right? Did she work in some?
Yes, yeah. Carla Hayden. Yeah, she was a librarian at the Whitney Young. She was a children's librarian at Whitney Young, and I did Kwanzaa for her young charges there. And we also, I was there the day that Wally Amos came and gave cookies to everybody. You know,
Amos.
I made some kind of presentation on that day too. But Carla, she's Sharon Howard at the Schomburg. I know a lot of librarians that I've been friends with over the years that are really, pivotal.
Now, she never forgive us. Hopefully the Black Star Network continues to spread and everybody. So we got to mention Jesse Carney Smith. We can't.
Fisk. Oh yeah, from Fisk. Yeah. Oh yes, indeed. Yeah, I interviewed her too. To my,
Oh wow.
Yeah, she was really.
So with all this, and again, I mean, just in this moment, I hope everybody is taking notes, particularly young people. Y'all are listening to these two master teachers and getting a lot of homework assignments as we're thinking about this. And here we are in the 21st century. It's 2022. Where is all this controversy coming from? There's a recent study by the Southern Poverty Law Center. They assessed the public school curriculum, and they said on the issue of civil rights, just on that issue, 20 states failed in terms of what is actually being taught. And then folks are saying on the other end of the spectrum, we should broaden the themes in Black History Month, make it broader, and then folks are saying, well, it's not being taught enough. And, meanwhile, our young people, we're all teachers, we know, a lot of the history that they are getting, to the degree they're getting any at all, is pop culture stuff. Harriet Tubman on the $20 bill, Instagram posts, businesses promoting Black History Month. What would y'all say about the state of Black History Month today as cultural workers who are really continuing to teach and work in that tradition?
We need to go deeper. I know one thing that Dr. Thompson used to do, Dr. Curl used to in Chicago, they challenge us to go deeper. So it's one thing to say Harriet Tubman's name, and it's another thing to know what she actually did and where she came from. And when you know about Carter G. Woodson in a deeper way, you can appreciate him more. Everybody, has a value that's way beyond what we see on the surface. We just recite these names. We really not doing anything. And maybe then we can throw away this notion that they, I know that Ida was talking about, they gave us Black History Month. They gave us the shortest month. There's no they. We have to really go into depth and the details so we really know what we're talking about.
Ida, you're one of our flagship universities, so I know you see this kind of stuff every day. What do you think?
To that end, it's very orchestrated. This is not by accident. I always tell my students, both the adult as well as collegiate, that history is intellectual nutrition. And you're malnourished if you don't have an understanding of the nutrition. So right now, Yale's most popular field is history. Yale went about a complete public relations campaign to rebrand what history is, and it is now their #1 undergraduate major in the midst of the STEM explosion or STEAM explosion we're dealing with right now. Concurrently, at many HBCUs, history departments are floundering. They're actually being understaffed, they're being overwhelmed, they're being undervalued and being slightly dismissed. So it's not by accident that this kind of behavior in the midst of a rather rising conservative tide is happening in the midst of where history is now becoming rather mute. So it's very intentional that people don't understand the consequence. History is not names and dates, it's concepts and ideas that limit the circumference of your movement. And because people have a very poor nutrition, because they have not been taught the history, either at the knee of a parent or in a school or in a church or in some kind of civic space, then they believe what they see on the social media, 140 characters, is history. And so there's a great disconnect there. And I think the students in Baltimore City during the 2020 Summer of Discontent said they wanted to decolonize the curriculum. And they want to know who was Baldwin. They want to know who these authors were. They really want to know, but no one's telling them because it doesn't fit the criteria for what the state mandates as a test to be approved. But I do have to, at the same time, applaud the state of Maryland. I'm working with the Department of Social Studies teachers, and they're actually teaching how they rethinking and reworking how they teach history. I've been invited on several occasions to speak with their teachers in social studies to help them understand at least about the HBCUs of Maryland, which was rather anathema to most of them. They did not understand that there was only one authentic HBCU that was created in Maryland by Black people, which is Morgan State. And the other 3 incarnations have different origin stories, which I can't go into at this juncture. But nevertheless, there is a hunger and there's a desire. And I believe we are the stewards that need to meet this. And the late, goodness, his name escapes right now, Dr. Harold Pinkett, Morgan graduate, first African-American hired at NARA, said that this is a racial responsibility. So we owe it to no one else but to our children and our ancestors to steward this. So if we fail, then we failed. We can't point to anybody else.
My goodness. Now you about to say something, man. Wow.
No, I mean, we have to keep fighting for our history and culture to be taught in public institutions. That's for sure, but we have to do it at home and we have to do it in the community in an organized way. We just can't afford to be trapped in just the public education fight for our history and culture, because that we'll never win in that situation. We have to make sure we overwhelm them with what we know from home. We bring it with us,
Sounds
and I must do a boost for the association. I didn't mean to cut you off. Greg,
no, this is exactly. Go ahead.
To join ASALH in our efforts to do so for the next 100 years. There are products, there are organizations, there are people such as myself and Larry, as well as yourself. Remember my branch, Greg, that really can reach out to these young people and are concerned about even some of our not so young people. Because if you don't know as a parent, how can you teach what you don't know? And that's so right. A lot of it is resulting that the parents themselves didn't get it. And so there's a lot of disconnect, and I don't fault anybody because we're so into this part of the pond that we see it and we live it. But those people who are on land or in other parts of the pond don't understand it. So I can't really indict anyone for being, quote, guilty of not doing things. Those of us who know need to diffuse. And whether they choose to receive or not, that's a different story. But we need to be the ones to diffuse in every way we can. And so that's incumbent upon us that know to share. And definitely join.
Could you help us? Just let us know how would folks who are watching say, I want to join Asala. What should they do? What's the first step? Because you my leader in the branch here. That's right.
Well, you can go to asalh.org. That is our main website. And if you're a little bit skittish about physically joining, we have a YouTube channel. So ASALH has a YouTube channel where a lot of our content is there for free. We would love you to subscribe to kind of boost our numbers to help us get other kinds of content going, because we're all about learning for every grade, every age group across the African diaspora. We have international persons of interest. We have about 7 countries around the world that celebrate Black history in their own way, in their own domestic spheres, and we're in conversation with them as well. Woodson traveled internationally, was fluent in Spanish as well, taught in the Philippines, and there actually is a book called The Miseducation of the Filipino that actually models itself off of the miseducation of the Negro. Yeah. And so as a result, Woodson's influence is far more global and far more saturated than we give him credit for. So we're all trying to excavate and lift up the torch that he lit and keeping it lit into the 21st century. So asalh.org.
So yeah. We'll pause here, and when we come back, we'll talk about the future of Black History Month. In fact, we've already started, and whether we should or shouldn't have one, where these influences are coming in. We've already gotten our marching orders, so when we come back, we'll get into what this looks like going forward beyond even our lives. So back in a moment at the Black Table.
Hi, I'm Dr. Jackie Hood Martin, and I have a question for you. Ever feel as if your life is teetering and the weight and pressure of the world is consistently on your shoulders? Well, let me tell you, living a balanced life isn't easy. Join me each Tuesday on Black Star Network for A Balanced Life with Dr. Jackie. We'll laugh together, cry together, pull ourselves together, and cheer each other on. So join me for new shows each Tuesday on Black Star Network, A Balanced Life with Dr. Jackie.
We're back. Welcome back to the Black Table. We're continuing our conversation with Larry Crow and Ida Jones on the past, present, future of Black History Month. We've covered a lot of ground in these few minutes. So I want to ask you both to kind of think about what Black History Month looks like perhaps going forward. All these quote unquote controversies, critical race theory and not teaching it, non-political stuff. And as you both were talking, it's very striking that in some ways, it seems like you all are advocating a return to what was working for us before the end of Jim Crow. I mean, these networks of institutions, home-based, church-based, sororities, fraternities, the Masons, everyone, all these institutions. Do you have any thoughts on the contemporary landscape and how these conversations, which sometimes get reduced to whether or not Maya Angelou is on a quarter or Harriet Tubman's on a $20 bill or Martin Luther King's I Have a Dream, project forward. How do you see us continuing this struggle to kind of to tell our stories, to teach our truths and to help spread the word?
Yeah, there's one of the things that concerns me, I think was expressed in that little short film that Brother Daryl Scott did years ago, was a part of, where Black youth were really embarrassed in school to be reminded that they were Black in a Black History Month program. This is something that, it's, but it's something that's real, that people are embarrassed because they think that somehow Black History Month is some kind of imposition from the system, or in fact, one of them asked, the fellow who's the documentary filmmaker asked the question and said, is there a Jewish History Month? But the answer is that there actually is. And Jews celebrate it. But we don't, they celebrate it mostly in their own venues, not so much, in the public school. So we have that kind of dynamic we're wrestling with.
I think with our young people in particular, it's going to be a hard sell because they believe themselves post-racial. And this has been the kind of tea they've been sipping for quite some time, since the age of Obama in 2008. So now that they're becoming of age and having these microaggressions that they're experiencing with their friends who they've been holding hands with and playing jumping jacks with since that time, they're now seeing a much more harsher reality. And then they're also seeing a much more global reality of this kind of anti-Black thought. So my discussion is to really have them understand, as Larry so eloquently said, there is a point where there needs to be a centralized ethnic understanding so that you can know who and how you are to then integrate fully with another person. When you are only knowing yourself in partial or in pieces, you don't even understand yourself or the richness of your heritage. And there's some issue with even being called African. I teach at a local Bible college, and one of the African students said he spoke to a coworker and said, well, African-American sister, I'm not African. I'm American, period. No qualifiers, no adjectives. So as a result, wrestling with this mindset of who and how we identify. Woodson understood that. The others had understood it in the 1970s when the name changed as well. Regardless of how you choose to self-identify, people will impose upon you certain qualifiers. And it would be behooving you to enrich yourself to understand where those qualifiers come from, so that you can then respond out of your intellect, not out of your gut reaction. Because right now there's so much gut reaction going on. That's why certain individuals are being able to be promoted and saying that this was no coup on January 6th and other kinds of misinformation like that, because people are responding out of gut, not out of their head. So there's a larger misinformation campaign, anti-intellectual campaign going on around the world. But we need to understand, for those of us who choose to, understand and be empowered by our history and our capacity to survive. And also the bicentennial birthday of Harriet Tubman is this year as well. So we want to say happy bicentennial birthday to Sister Tubman as well.
Yes, Eastern Shore represent, no question. Man, in fact, we'll kind of close in a moment, but I'd be remiss if I didn't bring up that money issue one more time, because I've heard people on both sides of this issue. Either y'all feel strongly about having these two sisters on money thinking about the things that are like right there in front of her. Harriet Tubman and the debate on whether she should be on the $20 bill or not. And then of course, Maya Angelou has a quarter now. It's a small thing, but as you said, Ida, there's so much misinformation out there. Are those teachable moments? Are those points of entry? I don't know if you either way, as we work to getting the curriculum and getting the folk together and reconnecting to those solid spaces where we can do this stuff at home, do it in our community, that's everywhere. And then that's the thing they'll see on social media. And, but
it's rather performative. It's performative because we're going to cyber currency. So we're actually going to a paperless currency anyway. So at some point, once again, like the Freedmen's Savings Bank, you're going to put Douglas at the end when this has already been losing for so many years before. So then the failure comes with the face of Blackness. So the idea of doing this is very performative. Hopefully they'll have a Black designer design it. I don't know. It's almost a moot issue at this juncture to know that even the fact that she was called currency is now being honored on currency really could cause some of us to really have an issue with that in terms of the medium through which she's being honored. So I'm ambivalent.
That's powerful. That's
but
powerful.
I don't know the details. I don't know the details of how these historical figures became involved, but I would guess, because I interviewed a brother who was on the postal board in Los Angeles who pushed for the Kwanzaa stamp. When people in the community were saying, Maulana Karenga has put himself on, I said, no, he did not put himself on a stamp. And the white man didn't put him on a stamp. It was a vote of the postal board that a brother was on who had the idea and persuaded other people to vote for. In this regard, I'm sure some well-meaning Black person, decided that Harriet Tubman should be on the $20 bill and push for it. And for me, whether she's on, it's an opportunity to teach about it. It's an opportunity for me to talk for 3 hours about Harriet Tubman.
Mm-hmm. Right. Well, on that note, I want to thank you both for joining the Black Table. Two master teachers, Ida Jones, master teacher, archivist, author, community builder, vice president for membership of the Association for the Study of Afro-American Life and History, the founders, the creators of what we now know as Black History Month. And Larry F. Crow, one of our greatest interviewers, raconteurs, a master teacher himself, producer in the History Makers, who has probably interviewed more important African-American figures than anyone. And I encourage you all to go to asalh.org. Want to know more about it. In fact, even join the Association for the Study of Afro-American Life and Histories and check out the History Makers. That's one word.
.org. Yeah.
Historymakers.org. Thank you, Larry.
4,000 interviews online.
4,000. How many did you do, Larry? Would you say?
2,000 and something.
About half those interviews. And if you think you just heard it yourself, you got a little taste of it. And I hope you all see where we are going with the Black Table. Week by week, every Friday, tune in, and you're going to be introduced not only to some things that we may not have known, and you'll be introduced to different ways of thinking about things we think we know, and you're going to be introduced to a whole constellation of folks who you should know a whole lot more about. So we're very deliberate about bringing folks to the table who we need to know more about, who can help us know more about ourselves and the world. It's time to be smart.
Roland Martin's doing this every day.
Oh, no punches!
Thank you, Roland Martin, for always giving voice to the issues.
Look for Roland Martin in the whirlwind, to quote Marcus Garvey again.
The video looks phenomenal, so I'm really excited to see it on my big screen.
Support this man, Black Media. He makes sure that our stories are told.
See, this difference between Black Star Network and Black-owned media and something like CNN.
I got to defer to the brilliance of Dr. Carr and to the brilliance of the Black Star Network.
I am rolling with Roland all the way.
Honored to be on a show that you own. A Black man owns the show.
Folks, Black Star Network is here.
I'm real revolutionary right now. Roland was amazing on that.
I love y'all.
I can't commend you enough about this platform that you've created for us to be able to share who we are, what we're doing in the world, and the impact that we're having.
Let's be smart. Bring your eyeballs home.
You can't be Black-owned media and be scared.
You dig? We're preparing now to clear the table for our episode of the Black Table, and we'll end this conversation on the past, present, and future of Black History Month with a couple of reflections on the founder of Negro History Week in 1926, Carr G. Woodson. It was Mary McLeod Bethune who wrote, who was very good friends with Carter Woodson and took over the association. In fact, as Dr. Woodson passed in April 1950, in the May 1950 issue of the Negro History Bulletin, she said, I shall always believe in Carter Woodson. He helped me to maintain faith in myself. He gave me renewed confidence in the capacity of the race for development and in the capacity of my country for justice, for her own people and for all people. With the power of cumulative fact, he moved back the barriers and broadened our vision of the world and the world's vision of us. In speaking about Carter Woodson that same year, W.E.B. Du Bois said, Carter Godwin Woodson, at the age of 71, made transition, illustrates what race prejudice can do to a human soul and also what it is powerless to prevent. I know of no one man who in a lifetime has unaided built up such a national celebration. Speaking of Negro History Week, and we will end finally clearing the table with the words of Carter G. Woodson, who reminded us in his last editorial before he made transition in April 1950 that Negro History Week, now Black History Month, is the week set aside by the Association for the Study of Negro Life and History for the purpose of emphasizing what has already been learned about the Negro during the year. Meaning February is when we celebrate and tabulate what we learned in January, in March, what we learned in July and August, what we learned at the beginning and the end of the school year and in the summertime. February is when we talk about what we learned all the year round, not the only time we talk about the subject. So with that in mind, we'll see you next time at the Black Table on the Black Star Network.